In this one, I will be talking about the affiliates, funding, and partnerships of Idle No More, Grandmother's Voice, and the Redrum Motorcycle Club. And I'll also be connecting these organizations to the Biodigital Convergence. So, Idle No More is a Canadian left-of-center movement that promotes left-wing approaches to environmental and social issues. The group supports far-left campaigns such as defunding law enforcement agencies, canceling Canada Day, Canada's national holiday. It's physically sponsored by the Polaris Institute and has been funded by Honor the Earth and the Tides Foundation. We'll be looking at all of those as well. So, just want to say here that left and right wing is really just two wings of the same bird here. So it doesn't really matter what side you take because all are involved in the biodigital convergence, and we'll be kind of exploring that a little bit too. So the four founders of Idle No More are Jessica Gordon, Sylvia McAdam, Nina Wilson, and Sheila McLean, founded in 2012 to protest the Canadian Jobs and Growth Act, which was an omnibus budget bill during the tenure of former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, member of the country's Conservative Party. Idle No More protested right-of-center changes made to the Indian Act, the Navigation Protection Act, and the Environmental Assessment Act by the omnibus bill. And it also mentions the Assembly of First Nations. They ended up expressing support for Idle No More, but apparently has no official ties to them. I have talked about the Assembly of First Nations a little bit in a couple videos, including my previous video on the American Indian movement a little bit, and also in a video entitled UNDRIP and the Transhumanism Path. So, like I said here, it's fiscally sponsored by the Polaris Institute, and as well, they have received $120,000 grant in 2014 from an environmentalist organization that also supports a lot of native-related causes called Honor the Earth. And so we'll take a look at them as well. And then between 2014 and 2015, the Tides Foundation for the tar sands campaign. And the Tides Foundation, it says, is a major center-left grant-making organization and a major pass-through funder for left-leaning nonprofit organizations. Idle No More received a Tides Foundation grant from $75,000 in 2014 for general support and another $75,000 in 2015 through the Polaris Institute USA. So the thing here that's interesting is that the Tides Foundation actually has the majority of its funding comes from the Ford Foundation, and secondarily its funding comes from George Soros and other organizations like Open Society Foundations and such like that. And lastly, thirdly, I want to say you have Rockefeller-related organizations as well. So those are the organizations that sort of pour money into Tides Foundation. You got the Ford Foundation, number 1, number 2, George Soros, and number 3, the Rockefeller organizations. So in this particular page, it says here about Idle No More, a First Nations of Canada organization focused on justice, security, resource use, and climate change. We're going to be talking about what that actually means, which I've covered in various videos. Arose in response to attacks on treaty rights by resource extractors, and there are chapters in Brazil, US, Australia, France, and other nations. Networks Indigenous Climate and Resource Action Worldwide. So I just want to say here that these are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and these are sort of like the mandates for organizations to follow on board a United Nations agenda. These are United Nations mandates, and even the standardization organizations like the International Standardization Organization, International Electrotechnical Commission, and such like this, which all support the biodigital convergence, use the Sustainable Development Goals as their mandates to complete their goals. So the Tides Foundation was founded in 1976 by someone named Drummond Pike, the son of a California investment banker. Pike began his career in political activism in 1970 as associate director for the now defunct Youth Project in Washington, D.C. A Youth Project had spun out of the Center for Community Change and was set up to channel money from young wealthy donors to progressive groups fighting for social change. Pike pursued a similar model as the basis for the Tides Foundation, using donor-advised funds to incentivize liberal donors to give to Tides, since they would play an advisory role in its grant making. And Tides actually receives, just to give you like the actual money amount here for you, it pretty well receives just over $26 million from the Ford Foundation here. With George Soros, this goes over 22 million. If people want to do the math themselves, feel free. And then for the Rockefeller organizations here, which we see about 4 of them there, you have just over $11 million from them. So those are the top 3 funders, and any of these other organizations like the Carnegie Corporation of New York and various others like Omidyar Network Fund, which that's the family, I believe, that founded eBay. So to move on to show Honor the Earth a little bit, it says that basically this person is the person that runs it. Then you have this Palestinian woman and Betty Lyons. Those are the people I will be reading about. When you click on each of these people over here, no information seems to pop up, which is kind of interesting. So this person named Amy Suzu, who's from Oglala, Lakota. She's the executive director of the Remembering the Children Memorial in Rapid City, South Dakota, a memorial dedicated to children who lost their lives at the Rapid City Indian School. With over 20 years of experience working in Native American nonprofits in and around the Black Hills region of South Dakota, primarily focusing on work with Indigenous youth. Her work with Native nonprofits have been informed by her experience growing up on the Rosebud and Pine Ridge reservations and living in Rapid City for the last 20 years, where she is raising her 4 children alongside her husband, Tracy, and an engaged community member and advocate for equity in Rapid City. And she is currently a commissioner for the Rapid City Human Relations Commission and board member of the Rapid City Public School Foundation and Rapid City Arts Council. And she has 3 associate degrees in early childhood education from Bay Mills Community College, the bachelor's in education from Oglala Lakota College, certified fundraising manager, and also a graduate certificate from the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy, and is working to complete a master's in nonprofit management and leadership from Arizona State University. So what's interesting here is that the term indigenous is used largely by these Native organizations, and as I've said in various videos, the term indigenous is not defined in UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations for Rights of Indigenous People, and it allows for all these land and resource rights to quote-unquote indigenous people. So if it doesn't even define the word, then really how do they distribute, how are the resources and land rights and things like this actually distributed, right? And with no definition of indigenous in and of itself, especially coming from the United Nations, that could just be chosen on a whim. And by the way, the United Nations is built in New York City at Rockefeller Plaza, so it is just another Rockefeller organization. So then you have this person, Lena, who is Palestinian Lebanese organizer from Jerusalem and Bethlehem, born and raised in exile. on occupied central Texas. She believes that indigenous sovereignty and global indigenous solidarity is a key component of principled anti-imperialism and the creation of a better world, right, if you say so. So the thing here is that I have made different videos about the Palestine protests and about their funding and how pretty much it just goes hand in hand. When I say it goes hand in hand with Israel, what goes hand in hand with Israel is the fact that you have technical committees, which are what these standardization organizations have, to have multiple country standardization organizations collaborate on projects. So in the Blockchain Technical Committee, which is ran by Australia, and then the Cybersecurity Technical Committee, which is ran by Germany, both Israel and Palestine's standardization organizations, as each country has their own standardization organizations, they work together within the cybersecurity field and in the blockchain field, which is interesting because the blockchain is the backbone of this biodigital convergence and the backbone for smart city infrastructure. And then you also have them working together in a cybersecurity arena, which is interesting because these two regions are supposedly at war with one another. So that makes things a little bit interesting. And then also what I want to say is that the Tides Foundation and various Rockefeller organizations and George Soros organizations, as well as the Ford Foundation, are involved in the Palestinian protest organizations. So just like how the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is involved with boycott, divestment, sanctions, which seems to be an umbrella for a large portion of the Palestinian movement. So all in all, like, you can't protest your way out of something within a foreign nation like, you know, Canada or the US. And yes, I'm aware that these countries are actually corporations, but that's besides the point. You can't protest your way out of a war that is on another side of the world, right? So all in all, like, Team A, Team B between Israel and Palestine, right? And I'll leave those videos in the description for people to watch as well. So to continue on talking about Lena here, it says she brings experience in building up student and movement institutions focused on advocacy and agency from the grassroots. Her specialty and passion in political education, pedagogy, and movement culture. Not sure if I pronounced that right. She's played a critical role in the student movement at UT Austin and nationally across the so-called U.S. She regularly leads political education workshops for Arab community on indigenous struggle on Turtle Island, Puerto Rican struggle, black struggle, and the role of youth and students in the Palestinian struggle and demilitarism. She's a proficient researcher and has been recently featured in articles written in both English and Arabic. If she was a proficient researcher, she wouldn't be supporting either the Palestine movement or anything relating to Israel. And like I said, that's just Team A, Team B right there. That's all those movements really are. And then you have, it says here that in Austin, she brings together individuals and activists from a plurality of backgrounds to build a strong movement for Palestine. While she is an organizer with deep roots in her local community, she also brings experience from international struggles and relationships. In 2018, she co-organized and participated in the historic Indigenous delegation to Palestine, which brought Palestinian youth living in exile on Turtle Island, young Indigenous land defenders, and water protectors together to Palestine. So interestingly enough, Palestine actually supports UNDRIP. And then in 2019, she was honored to be invited on the Red Nations delegation to those two particular territories mentioned, which explored themes of border towns, extraction, food deserts, man camps, kinship culture, sovereignty, etc. In 2021, she traveled to Cuba on a delegation with interfaith community organization with a focus on grassroots community coalitions, right, anything but grassroots, whose focus ranged from cultural work and advocacy to health infrastructure. She has a robust background in legal and compliance. She is detail-oriented, driven by a passion of social justice for all people, rematriation, land back, and tackling environmental racism at its roots. She believes that when the people organize, they can win. She currently serves as a leader with the Palestinian Youth Movement. So there you have a connection to the Palestinian movement in and of itself with Honor the Earth. And also, I will show people that Idle No More also supports the Palestinian movement as well. And being that Honor the Earth has put funding into Idle No More, we can see that they're on the same page. So this person, Betty Lyons of the Onondaga Nation, President Executive Director of the American Indian Law Alliance, is an indigenous and environmental activist and citizen of the Onondaga Nation. She's worked for the Onondaga Nation for over 20 years and serves as a member of the Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee and has been an active participant at the annual United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues since the first session in 2001 as a delegate of the Onondaga Nation. Betty attended Cazenovia College and is a Bryant Stratton College graduate of the paralegal program. For her work on Indigenous sovereignty, she received an honorary degree from Onondaga Community College. Under the leadership of Tanya Ganella Frickner, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Betty worked closely with the American Indian Law Alliance since 1997 and joined them in 2014. During her time there, she received numerous issues, including advocating for the rights of Mother Earth, treaty support, educating on the doctrine of discovery, advocates for indigenous nations and people at the United Nations, right to self-determination and sovereignty, teaching indigenous history of women's rights, honoring the Truro Wampum Treaty in New York City, polishing the covenant chain with the U.S. as part of certain treaty obligations, and most recently she has been working with the National Institute for Law and Justice on helping families find closure around MMIW, and she believes that communities keep us safe, and it's up to indigenous communities and their allies to address the crisis of relatives. Sorry, I'm just trying to avoid saying certain words because I want to leave this video on YouTube. I don't want to take him down. And it says Onondaga Nation's land rights against the United States was rejected in 2005 by the Supreme Court. However, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights of the Organization of American States has agreed to hear the case and it will proceed forward. She is working closely with Onondaga Nation General Counsel Joseph J. Heath, and she is hopeful about how it will proceed. She helped negotiate with the White House's recognition of the Six Nations Haudenosaunee Confederacy and their cultural ambassadors, the Haudenosaunee Nationals. The White House supported the Haudenosaunee Nationals competing in the 2028 Olympics as sovereign and independent participants marching under the flag of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and traveling on their Haudenosaunee passports. She believes that sovereignty is still the issue for indigenous nations and peoples. She's particularly proud of working to get the Onondaga Nation Health Clinic funded, Tuscarora Health Clinic, and Tonawanda Health Clinic funded. Right. So all I got to say about the Olympics is that that is basically bread and circus right there. And she continues to work for the protection of indigenous peoples who are fighting to protect their traditions, territories, resources, and care for Mother Earth. In 2024, she's working on facilitating land returns, launching a campaign for the return of Onondaga Lake to Onondaga Nation. For concerns for indigenous peoples and Mother Earth, Betty serves on numerous boards, such as the above here. So, people, like I said, can look at the links that will be in the description if they have concerns or want to read further, see if there's something I missed, perhaps. I just want to say that this article is a decent read right here, and is written by a so-called futurist, if you will, meaning that basically a futurist is somebody who supports the biodigital convergence. And essentially here, I'm not going to go over this article because I used it in my previous video, but it talks about the various nanomaterials and things like this. And what's interesting is that the way that they use these nanomaterials and nanotechnology and its purposes are all under the guise of climate change, which is interesting because the term climate change is pretty much actually, really when you think about it, a synonym for biodigital convergence, because they're not talking about protecting the environment, they're talking about changing the environment from something that is physical and biological to something that is digital, and perhaps even blurring those lines and trying something in between. That is exactly what the biodigital convergence is. And so pretty much when people talk about climate change, what they are really talking about is using graphene which is made through a process of combining organic and inorganic materials. This is also why it doesn't matter if you recycle or compost or throw things in the garbage or whatever you decide to do, because what happens is, using a term called the circular economy, all of these things are really, all the waste is brought together and heated at very high temperatures, and this is how you create graphene, which is harder than steel and also way lighter than steel. So basically what I'm saying is the climate change nonsense in and of itself refers to this circular economy process where graphene is used in different things like quantum computing and also for metaverse applications. So pretty much when you hear people, which I'll be mentioning a little bit, about the Internet of Bodies, for instance, or the Internet of X things, what that basically is that's twinning anything that's organic into the metaverse and pretty much blurring those lines, right? So this is how graphene is used, and when people are talking about climate change, they're actually, like I said, talking about blurring that line between what's biological and digital. And as well, another aspect to the convergence, which I'll be talking about a little bit further, is called synthetic biology, which refers to 3D bioprinting and pretty much biomimicry in and of itself. So we'll get to that a little bit later. And also, I just want to say that graphene, just like the blockchain, is key in smart infrastructure into this convergence agenda. So this is a page for IDNM No More, and you can see a lot of the things that they do support here stands in solidarity with Palestinian people. So there you go, right? And I have nothing against the Palestinian people in and of themselves, but I do have something against the Palestinian movement in and of itself, and those groups which are funded by Rockefeller organizations, George Soros, the Ford Foundation, and various others. So all in all, it couldn't be further from grassroots, and these organizations will always market themselves as grassroots, which is nothing more than a lie. And pretty much here under the donate section of IDNM No More, it says that checks can be mailed to their sponsor, which is the Polaris Institute right here. So what is the Polaris Institute exactly? We will be diving into, and then eventually I will be talking about the founders of IDNM No More, or at least the four faces of it. So the Polaris Institute was established to enable citizens or people's movements to reskill and retool themselves for the struggle to bring about democratic social change in an age of corporate-driven globalization. The Institute works with various social movements and community-based groups to develop methods, strategies, and tactics for effectively challenging public policy making on vital economic, environmental, and social justice issues, with a particular focus on unmasking the corporate power that lies behind governments today. So pretty much the Polaris Institute involves itself in water-based activism and also the environment, as they say, but the team is pretty much consisting of psychologists, sociologists, neuroscientists, basically people that understand how the brain and thoughts work as well as human behavior. So that's pretty much what the Polaris Institute also really consists of. These are the board members here, which people can can look into themselves if they want, and they'll find that they have different kinds of backgrounds like what are mentioned here, as well as aspects of marketing, which marketing and psychology definitely go hand in hand, as you're, for instance, using different colors that might appeal to people, such as how a lot of fast food chains tend to use yellow or red in their color structure for the symbols that they create for their companies. So here you have Tony Clark, who is one of the founders of the Polaris Institute, and it says he's a Canadian activist working on trade and justice issues with a social focus on access to water. He received the 2005 Right Livelihood Award jointly with Maud Barlow, with whom he has often campaigned together. With their working lives closely connected for many years, Barlow and Clark are now recognized as two of the most respected citizen leaders in Canada and in the global justice movement generally. They have played a key role in campaigning against the World Trade Organization's free trade agenda. And in 1997, he founded the Polaris Institute with Maud Barlow on the board, quote unquote, for the purpose of unmasking the corporate power that lies behind government. Right, whatever you say. Concentrating on water, energy, and trade policy issues, Polaris Institute works on both domestic and international fronts. Polaris's activities have included a project on city countryside water struggles in the global south, a campaign to stop Canada's participation in the U.S. Defense Initiative known as the Star Wars program, and numerous other initiatives in municipalities and schools against bottled water. So, I'm obviously against bottling water, of course, as when the water is placed into plastic, there's different pollutants and stuff like that. But there are other aspects to the water that involve nanotechnology, which we will be getting to eventually. And unfortunately, these environmentalist type of organizations never really seem to address those. The only ones who actually address it, actually surprisingly, are the United Nations, but they display the nanotechnology in order to deal with problems like the pollutants in pharmaceuticals and stuff like that in the water, when in reality these nanotechnologies pretty much just absorb those pollutants and you ingest the nanotechnologies. So it doesn't really make a difference. And it says here that after Tony Clark's studies at the University of Chicago and inspired by Paulo Freire's work, Tony Clark returned to Canada to work on the social justice programs of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. He eventually became head of the Social Action Department and worked on a whole range of national and international social justice issues, and in 1987 he chaired, first with his fellow 2005 Right Livelihood laureate Maud Barlow, later by himself, the Action Canada Network, the largest coalition of civil society organizations and labor unions ever assembled in Canada to mobilize opposition to the free trade agenda. He was also a member of COC's national work from 1997-2003 and vice chair most of the time. So, and it also says that basically being the author or co-author of almost a dozen books, Clark's most recent publication is Tar Sands Showdown, Canada and the New Politics of Oil in an Age of Climate Change. There you go. He has also served on the board of directors for organizations such as the International Forum of Globalization, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and the Oakland Institute. Right, so as he talks about unmasking things behind government, he really is backed up by government and really different UN supporting organizations. So these people always try to present themselves with a positive image of sorts, but once again couldn't be further from the truth. So this is Maud Barlow over here, and it says that she's a Canadian activist and author, chairs the board of Washington-based Food and Water Watch, and is the founder of the Blue Planet Project. She co-founded the Council of Canadians and chaired its board for over 3 decades, served on the board of advisors of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and is a former counselor with the Hamburg-based World Future Council. Maud is the Chancellor of Brescia University College in London, Ontario. So, apologies for the pronunciation, but anyway, this board, the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, is something that Tom Goldtooth of the American Indian Movement sits on, just like the Indigenous Environmental Network. So, and then you have Casey Camp Coronek, whose brother was a member of the American Indian Movement as well. Just give me a second. Alright. So, back to it here. It says that she's the recipient of 16 honorary doctorates as well as many awards, including the 2005 Right Livelihood Award, known as the Alternative Nobel, and the 2005 Lannan Foundation Cultural Freedom Fellowship Award, the Citation of Lifetime Achievement of the 2008 Canadian Environment Awards, 2009 Earth Day Outstanding Environmental Achievement Award, 2009 Planet in Focus Eco Hero Award, and a 2011 Earth Care Award, the highest international honor of the Sierra Club. And in 2009, she served as senior advisor on water to the 63rd President of the UN General Assembly and was a leader in the campaign to have water recognized as a human right by the UN. I don't know what that exactly means, but when you're putting nanotechnology in the water, it doesn't really mean much. She's the creator of the Blue Communities Project, in which municipalities pledge to protect water as a human right and public trust and ban plastic bottled water. It's only really half the battle there. And there are now more than 25 million people living in official blue community towns and cities, including Paris, Berlin, Brussels, Thessaloniki, Los Angeles, Vancouver, and Montreal. She's also the author of a dozen reports and about 20 books. So, the Blue Planet Project, basically, just to read a little bit about it, it says that the Blue Planet Project is a leading water justice organization and part of a global movement that water is life, working to protect water for people and nature for generations to come. For more than 2 decades, they have fought for water justice based on the principles that water is a human right, public trust, and part of the global commons right. And it says that in this work, Blue Planet Project belongs to several international networks and works closely with many others, including the People's Water Forum and the Blue Communities Global Network, the Africa Water Justice Network, European Water Network, the Platform of Public Community Partnerships of the Americas, and the Inter-American Water Justice Network. So yes, they're an internationally connected organization. So, just right here, I'm just going to go over very briefly because I also mentioned it in my last in my last video, excuse me. So, basically, this is right from the United Nations themselves, where they're talking about nanotechnology in water treatment, and it says here that it's that it can cost-effectively treat contaminants in water that are untreatable by conventional methods. Adsorbents, disinfectants, catalysts, and membranes have the potential to become widely applied technologies in developing countries. And it also says that challenges formed by risk uncertainty, economic inclusion, and public inclusion obstruct the large-scale application of nanotechnology and an equal distribution of the related benefits. I don't really agree with that statement because all of these technologies are basically created, and the policies that surround their creation and use revolve around research councils, both on an international scale and also in particular countries as well, which have their own. They have their own research councils and standardization organizations as well, not just the International Standardization Organization or International Electrotechnical Commission or the IEEE. So they of course cite the World Economic Forum, and it says a decline in the available quantity and quality of fresh water is the main global risk that the world society will currently face in the coming decade. It's expected by 2025, 1.8 billion will live in countries or regions with absolute water scarcity, and the dependent relationship between water quality and water availability is thus a topic that needs attention. So basically what they are saying in short is problem, reaction, solution. So pretty much with what the World Economic Forum perceives as expected problems in future, and then also current problems that are being faced, like the pollutants in water, they justify that with nanotechnology. So the World Economic Forum and the UN are also part of the Biodigital Convergence, of course, and this is all just pretty much part of the whole problem, reaction, solution scenario. And it also mentions targets for clean water in the Millennium Development Goals. That's just a precursor term for Sustainable Development Goals. That's really all that means. And number 6 has to do with clean water. But when you read those Sustainable Development Goals, which I showed earlier in relation to Idle No More, for instance, they pretty much mean the exact opposite of what is actually said, or something just to twist the idea, such as when they talk about no hunger, for instance, they're talking about pretty much 3D bioprinting food and that sort of a thing. So, and then it says here, bacteria, heavy metals, and such cause 1.5 billion worldwide to suffer from water-related diseases each year, and more efficiently, and so they can be treated, again, the whole problem, reaction, solution with nanotechnology. And it mentions Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. And so it also mentions that it can improve the production of agricultural crops by preventing salinization and contamination of agricultural soils. And it uses Sustainable Development Goal 2, zero hunger, here to show that they're following that mandate. So pretty much when you have nanotechnology going into the plants and the water and stuff like that, not only are you twinning those aspects into the metaverse, but we're also ingesting that nanotechnology, and that's where the Internet of Bodies comes from, and just one small sliver of how they're creating the digital twin, and there are various aspects to that in and of itself, but I'll explore the digital twin concept further in other videos down the line. So, and I already have done that as well a little bit, but like I said, future videos, I'll talk about the digital twin a little bit more. And it says here that through developing the nanotechnology can create new jobs and stuff like that for people, and new water infrastructure. And graphene, for instance, is used in a lot of the water treatment and purification devices, which are not really purifying the water at all. While you get rid of other pollutants, the graphene just absorbs it, right? So, and that's where Sustainable Development Goal number 9 comes in: industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So, then, of course, it talks about perceived benefits, if you will, and mentions the potential for it, and it talks about adsorption, disinfection, photocatalysis, and membrane. So I'll read a little bit about those things. So adsorption is an established technology that can be improved using nanoparticles. It can address persistent toxic metals such as arsenic that are less easily treated using conventional technologies. Adsorbent attract contaminants in the water which become attached to their surface. Afterwards, they are removed and disposed of by, for instance, using Nanofiltration methods, which tend to contain graphene, like I said. So iron oxide nanoparticles are relatively cheap and well-tested adsorbents to clean groundwater from heavy metals. In addition, nanocellulose is a promising future adsorbent for developing countries due to its biodegradability and potential cost effectiveness, but it still requires substantial research and development. So, yeah, we'd be ingesting those iron oxide nanoparticles then. Then disinfection using nanoparticles removes bacteria and chemicals and stuff like that. But even if it is removing or possibly even absorbing those things, in this case removing it, we'll say, you still end up ingesting the nanoparticles that remove it. So silver nanoparticles are a suitable disinfectant because they are non-toxic even under limited exposure. And then, of course, you have photocatalysis, which is a relatively new nanotechnology for the treatment of water. Nanocatalysts are highly effective for treating things like E. coli and can remove compounds such as pharmaceuticals. Although photocatalysis can theoretically remove toxic metals like mercury, chromium, and arsenic, it remains difficult to do this in the field. Overall, photocatalysis is an effective but highly specific method. It uses nanoparticles that, when activated by ultraviolet light, break down pollutants such as bacteria, pesticides, and into non-toxic byproducts, as it says here. I take that with a grain of salt, though. And after use, the nanoparticles remain unchanged and can therefore be collected and reused. And it involves the ultraviolet photocatalysis involves the use of titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide nanoparticles. And three major advantages of it are the relatively modest technical installation and minimal operating experience required. And of course, they're going to talk about low costs and stuff like that. And then it mentions membranes here as a selective barrier within water, hindering solids bigger than their pores to pass through them. They are categorized according to their increasing filtration capacities, with decreasing pore sizes, microfiltration, ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, and reverse osmosis membranes. The smaller the pore sizes, the higher the pressure, and subsequently the energy required to push the water through the membrane. Therefore, research focuses on finding ways to improve cleaning ability without reducing permeability or ease of fabrication. And what happens here is it says for like potable water purification, multifunctional nanofiltration, and ultrafiltration membranes hold the greatest potential since their permeability is increased due to a better cleaning process resulting from the incorporation of nanoparticles. And they incorporate adsorbents and catalysts into their process. And these nanofillers are nanosilver, carbon nanotubes, titanium dioxide, polymer coated nanoparticles, etc. So due to the high energy requirements and treatment plant size to operate nanofiltration and reverse osmosis membranes, less developed countries should rather opt for functionalized ultrafiltration membranes or even low pressure driven microfiltration membranes for decentralized and POU systems. Right, so decentralized, that's like a key term pretty much used for the blockchain, but when you think about the blockchain in and of itself, you pretty much have, I'll just recommend people read a certain article called Transhuman Crypto Cloud Minds, written by Melanie Swan of the Blockchain Institute. I've also used that article in various videos. So pretty much nothing is actually decentralized on the blockchain, because what happens is when you're viewing it from a node, when you're using the blockchain from a node, which is the device used to access the blockchain, nodes from the context of that article are no different from human beings to machines. So therefore what I'm saying is, if I can communicate with people, whether in person or online or through the phone or whatever, then basically all blockchain products are pretty much daisy chained to each other. So nothing is ever truly decentralized or separate from anything else, such as the Evolve blockchain app, which Kellyanne Wolf is the face of. I'll leave those links in the description as well, or pinned, or in a pinned comment if I can't fit everything into the description. So I'm only going to read a little bit of this one, and so because I've already sort of gone over the basis of this, but basically it says here that it pretty much sort of reiterates a lot of what I was just reading, and it says that essentially the nanomaterials used, it just describes in a little bit more detail the nanomaterials that are used and the nanostructure behind the nanotechnology and its application a little bit further. And so you have 0D, 1D, 2D, and 3D materials. So 0D materials are like quantum dots. 1D include nano ribbons, nano belts, nanotubes, nano rods, nano wires. 2D are nano discs, nano walls, nano sheets, nano plates, and nano prisms. And 3D are nano flowers, nano pillars, nano cones, nano coils, and nano balls. And as per the European Commission, a nanomaterial is referred to as an incidental, natural, or fabricated material consisting of particles in an unbound state, or as an agglomerate, or as an aggregate in which 50% or greater of the particles in the number size distribution and one or more external dimensions in the size of 1 to 100 nanometers, even though there are at present several types of nanomaterials. It is indicated that a variety of advanced forms will be developed in the coming years. And on the other hand, according to the construction, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency categorized the nanomaterials as carbon-based composites, combining nanoparticles using other nanoparticles or with bigger bulk type material, dendrimers, and metal-based. And so you can see different diagrams throughout this article that will pretty much be throwing all of these into different categories and giving some examples of this. So like the photocatalytic ones, for instance, are carbon-based, and then you have different composites and such like that for biomedical application, sensing, stuff like that. But different kinds of sensors are silver, which are metal-based, and then you have platinum and gold as well, which are used in different things such as gene therapy, which is really just messing with people's genetics and DNA and RNA and stuff like that. And then you also have biosensors, and then of course you have platinum for petroleum refining and stuff like that. So basically my point here is that these kinds of nanomaterials and stuff like that, nobody is talking about these in these environmentalist organizations that preach the climate change mantra and stuff like this, and caring about Mother Earth or whatever. They really don't care, because they're not talking about these nanomaterials, and they're not talking about the dangers of these things. If anything, at best, they are pushing for the use of these things and are all for twinning people, plants, water, and different aspects of biology into the metaverse. That's pretty much what they're about, especially when they're using that mantra of climate change in and of itself. And what I will say too is that the regime and rebellion, so regime meaning the government and things like the United Nations, and then the rebellion, which are these fake activists or hacktivists or whatever, which are market themselves as grassroots, which really are the furthest thing from grassroots. The general common denominator are the standardization organizations or the UN and stuff like that. So the regime and rebellion are either one and the same or funded by the same central parties in and of itself, such as the UN, for example, or the World Economic Forum. So all narratives are always controlled in history. So never take anything at face value ever. And always do your research, especially when looking at these organizations. And also don't take anything I even say at face value either. Cross-reference the things that I say, and also dive into the links that I use and stuff like that. I'm open to feedback and to have discussions. And also, what I will say probably here and at the end of my video is that I'm open to doing live streams and discussions with the founders of Idle No More, with Cliff Matthias of the Redrum Motorcycle Club, and also anybody in Grandmother's Voice, such as Jody Harbour, Renee Thomas Hill, or Gail in and of himself. You know, everybody has the right to, you know, face their accuser, and it would also benefit everybody if there was an open discussion. So this here talks about carbon nanomaterials and carbon nanotubes, which are used for chemical vapor deposition or graphite or by the arc discharge technique. And the carbon nanotubes are regarded as the stiffest and most robust materials, and the chain of continuous covalent carbon-to-carbon bonding enables this nanomaterial to become an exceptionally strong material. So in terms of carbon-to-carbon bonding, one example of this is really the circular economy, where, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you put your trash into the recycling or the compost or whatever, it all ends up in the same place and is used in making graphene, and all local governments are involved in this, and waste management organizations such as Walker Industries, for instance. So, and then it of course mentions graphene as a carbon-based nanomaterial, and mentions reduced graphene oxide and graphene quantum dots, graphene oxide, graphene nanosheets, multi-layer graphene, and it talks about their potential in infrared, and, you know, really acts as a battery in and of itself, or acts as something for structural integrity. But most importantly, like a lot of graphene ends up within us, whether it's through food supplies or through nature and such like this. So really, in and of itself, it's just used for, I'd say, twinning into the metaverse is probably the most common aspect in which graphene would be used, or some other piece of smart infrastructure, but definitely involved in the convergence in and of itself. So, and then of course, this is where you have different metal-based nanomaterials like iron oxide, titanium dioxide, and zinc oxide, nanosilver, nanogold, and quantum dots. So for instance, gold nanoparticles are on band-aids and in toothpaste. So then of course you have here different aspects within the aqueous environment, so nanomaterials in water basically, and you'll talk about water purification and stuff like that. Of course, like I mentioned, the whole problem, reaction, solution, and you have different, like titanium dioxide, for instance, and zinc nanoparticles and stuff like this. So all in all, yeah, I'll leave this link in the description and people can go through and read it themselves, as I've already pretty much read about the adsorbents and stuff like this. So people can take a look themselves if they so desire, and if people have questions, they can feel free to throw that into the comment section. So to move forward, I'm going to now talk about the actual founders of Idle No More, or at least the four faces of it. So you have this person, Jessica Gordon, here, who it says in the view about Indigenous rights, nation building, Indigenous governance, treaty protection, policy development, analysis, strategy, and implementation, works in the nonprofit sector, human rights, labor standards, codes, as well as employee relations, union structures, policies, legislation, and the public sector, and through knowledge of board governance and development, as well as the organizational capacity development of such organizations. So you have program development, facilitation, policy development, and program management, Indigenous rights, and political strategy. And she's done different webinars and been on different panels and such like that. So she is the Director of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation within YWCA Canada. And then also she has been the Senior Director of Indigenous Relations and is was an elected official in Pasqua First Nation. And then you have her having worked for the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, which I believe is like just another government organization, pretty much. The band councils and such, Assembly of First Nations, organizations like this are no different from non-native politicians. So, and then you have her as the Director of Programming for the Saskatchewan Indian Métis Friendship Center. So all the friendship centers are pretty much under the umbrella of the National Association of Friendship Centers. And the one who runs the National Association there, her name is Josephine. She is a member of the World Economic Forum. So that should basically show you where the friendship centers pretty much lead from, is through the World Economic Forum. And, you know, she's had various positions in her community as well, ranging from different things revolving around treaties, the gaming authority, if you will, and urban aboriginal strategy. And then she has volunteer experience at something called Imagine Canada, which is something that strengthens charities and nonprofits. Founder and director of something called Ancestral Connections, Inc., and a community member of Circle of Voices, Regina Catholic School Division. She's a founder of Idle No More, and so on and so forth. So, again, in future videos, I'll probably be talking about the founders of Idle No More in more depth. Then you have Sylvia McAdam here, who's a direct descendant of Treaty Peoples and is from this particular nation. And she holds a JD from the University of Saskatchewan and a BHS from the University of Regina. She's a co-founder of the award-winning global grassroots Indigenous-led Idle No More. Grassroots, if you say so. Idle No More has changed the political and social landscape of Canada, as well as reached the global community to defend and protect all lands, water, and animals from devastation and climate change. Once again, here we go. And she's the author of a few different works there, as stated. So then you have Nina Wilson, who is Nakota and Plains Cree from White Bear Treaty 4 territory and is currently completing a master's degree. I believe that is at University of Manitoba, and I'm not sure if she actually has completed it or not. But once again, this is what live streams are for, and she can feel free to discuss that with me, among other things, especially the whole nature of this entire video I'm making. So, it also basically says that she is one of the more interesting people who came out of the Idle No More movement. Wilson and 3 other founders worked with the Suzuki Foundation to help bring the movement to public attention in late 2012. In 2013, the 4 founders were recognized by Foreign Policy magazine on their annual Global Thinkers list, but despite Idle No More's initial success, things haven't been going well for the movement. Right. So, and then it talks about different problems and such like that with the Suzuki foundation. However, this is something I'll probably have to dive into a little further, or things that I would actually prefer to hear directly from Nina Wilson, because the real big question is, why would you work with the David Suzuki Foundation, knowing that David Suzuki is a globalist, all for the biodigital convergence, and of course preaches the same climate change mantra. So, and then also, just before I get to Sheila McLean over here, I want to say as well, too, that it says that, like, according to First Voices Radio, through Radio Kingston, WKNY, 1490 AM, or 107.9 FM, Nina Wilson had done an interview on there, and in particular, she had mentioned a few different things. She had said that she had done work with Jessica, who is like Jessica Gordon of I Don't Know More, involving travel issues, poverty, racism, and she was a grad student at the University of Manitoba and did a thesis on decolonization. Now, she also mentioned that her mother was a member of the American Indian movement, so people can feel free to pause the video and read these screenshots if they want. And what I will say is that Vicki Wilson is who the mother of Nina Wilson is, of the American Indian movement. I aim to look into Vicki a little bit further and perhaps even talk about her role in the American Indian movement. So I think that's pretty interesting nonetheless, because on the radio show in and of itself, she didn't mention her mother's name. So, and then these are just some pictures of Vicki Wilson, who has passed away. And also the reason why I end on this one here for Nina Wilson is because in building these stupid digital avatars on Facebook, you are pretty much contributing to the idea of the digital twin in and of itself. So what I will say is that while Nina Wilson has, called out, the freedom movement, if you will, as racist and such, which I don't support the freedom movement in any way, shape, or form, but she is not talking about how they're involved in the convergence, and the freedom movement uses these stupid avatars as well, along with a lot of people, so all you're doing is really building the digital twin and contributing to the biodigital convergence. So, now to just talk about Sheila McLean very briefly. So, Sheila McLean is the last person I will speak about, and she is the only non-native person that is one of the founders of I Don't Know More. The other three people are native. So Sheila McLean is a third-generation white settler who was born and raised on Treaty 6 territory. Dr. McLean has worked in education for 30 years, teaching high school, adult education, and graduate and undergraduate courses in anti-racism at the University of Saskatchewan. She's an organizer with the I Don't Know More network and is a scholar and community organizer. Work is focused on research projects and actions that address inequality, particularly on how white dominance is created and maintained within a white settler society. She's a curriculum developer for this particular program here. So this is interesting because, like I've said, all narratives in history are controlled on both sides. So what I'm saying is that for, we'll say British Freemasons, for instance, you also have native Freemasons like Joseph Brant and such like that, who's Mohawk, by the way. So what I'm saying is that this idea right here, where she talks about white settler colonialism, these are just things that really, honestly, create a more divisive society in and of itself and prevent people from actually working together. And, all in all, too, as well, what I'm going to say is that this this really contributes to what you call Marxism, which is like group classifications in and of itself. So, and these group classifications are basically touchy subjects, whether it's religion, race, or some kind of social class that exists in your region. So, in this particular case, she is talking about race, and in and of itself, too, it's just kind of like really pitting different races toward each other, and things like the anti-hate network, for instance. You have Evan Balgord, the founder of the anti-hate network, who also sits in different boards that revolve around counterterrorism. So what I'm saying is Marxists are the ones forming public policies and stuff that revolve around being able to define people as terrorists and that sort of a thing. So all in all, too, like I'm saying, this kind of rhetoric and that sort of a thing is really just more divisive than anything. And also, as well, too, with this being said, this particular paper that she has, in and of itself, is actually comes out of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where the founder, Tony Clark of the Polaris Institute, who I was mentioning earlier, has been a board member for. So it's pretty interesting to see this sort of turn around where the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has an article, published by Sheila McLean. So, anyway, that's enough of that. Now to move on to talk about grandmother's voice. So, grandmother's voice, it says, is a visionary Indigenous organization that aims to unite Indigenous voices while extending a warm invitation to individuals from all directions. And it says, with deep reverence for the timeless wisdom carried by grandmothers, we endeavor to be a source of healing and unity within communities. Our mission is to revive and amplify these ancestral insights and values, nurturing them for generations to come. We extend our hand to individuals, corporations, and organizations across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, inviting them to join us in embracing the teachings of Indigenous ancestors, grandmothers, and grandfathers. Through this collaboration, we aspire to craft a tapestry of hope, heart, and healing that envelops all. So, the co-founders of Grandmother's Voice include Jody Harbour, Grandmother Gail, Grandmother Renee, and Allan Sutherland. So, just to go over all of them in particular, I'm going to start off with Jody Harbour, and we'll be getting back to her a little bit as well. So it says here that Jody Harbour has experience being a creative entrepreneur, has worked at Paramount Work Gear, Grandmother's Voice, and something called Breast Rest. So she's a business owner in the clothing, textile industry, and also she describes herself as an urban Indigenous woman. She is a successful business owner and entrepreneur in the fashion industry, and passion for Indigenous culture, knowing the history of her ancestors, led her to find Grandmother's Voice, national organization that provides healing, guidance, and education through Indigenous ways of knowing. And then the Breast Rest was a basically bra alternative that she designed. And it says here, I continue to work in the two worlds of balancing philanthropic Indigenous values with an understanding of the bottom line. Anything we create with the foundation of serving others is about sustainability and considering 7 generations ahead. And she's also been a support counselor, volunteer for the Women's Center of Halton, a volunteer for a Wellspring Birmingham Gilgan House, which deals with like cancer patients and such like that, and Indigenous support for Savis of Halton, which basically is something that provides different social services to people. So that's just some very, very little bit about her background there. And like I said, we'll be getting back to talking about her. And then you have Gail, who is on Six Nations of the Grand River First Nation. Mother's bloodline extends back many generations as Bear Clan woman of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and her father was Mohawk, Turtle Clan, and she also honors her father's grandfather who traveled to this land from Ireland and brought with him Celtic roots. She's proud to be Mohawk, feels the power of the sacred land pulsing through her blood. Her story here on Turtle Island is expressed in an oral tradition passed through generations with deep history. Steeped in rich culture, our ancestors survived many challenges and many changes and challenges, but retained a deep connection to the land and spiritual knowledge. She's a medicine woman with original instructions to support all people on their journey. Mother of 5 children and 15 grandchildren who are connected to their cultural ways, and she's proud to see them walk their path. Being born into the Bear Clan means a path of healing and medicine, and so she walks this path proudly and is delighted that she has created little bears to follow. She's carried a great burden over the past few hundred years. Her Six Nations community struggles with many issues, and there is a way to uplift our hearts and soils. Then it is our responsibility to accept the challenge of providing what we can. She's a traditional healer, medicine, knowledge keeper, pipe carrier, and much more. Together with the heartbeat of ceremony and love, our people can breathe in the essence of unity and peace. She's the founder of the Ancestral Voices Healing Center on Six Nations, Grandmothers Circle the Earth, Sacred Sites, Sacred Journeys, Land of the Dancing Deer, and as well Grandmother's Voice. So, and then now to talk briefly about Renee Thomas Hill, otherwise known as Grandmother Renee. She is of the Mohawk Nation, Turtle Clan from Six Nations of Grand River Territory. She's a Haudenosaunee woman. She's responsible to carry on the teachings of our way of life. She is to carry on the message of peace, power, and righteousness. She shares this in the following ways: as an Indigenous woman, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, educator, historian, artisan, First Nations doll maker, carrying on the stories of our ancestors, holder of names, genealogy researcher, storyteller, traditional and golden age smoke dancer, traditional counselor and healer of addiction treatment center, traditional knowledge of our plants, foods, medicine, an agriculturalist, the continuation of our seeds, grieving support, most of all a spiritual being. It's also a grandmother and auntie to many. My walk in life is to share awareness and the uplifting of the spirit through the teachings of our mother, the earth, and the understanding of the good mind. Right. So, okay, so now that I have read a little bit about all of their backgrounds, what I just want to say is interesting is that in 2021, Renee Thomas Hill, Six Nations elder living in two worlds, is one of the scheduled guest speakers here, or former scheduled guest speakers of an event that is hosted by the Rotary Club and Grace United Church. And then you have Jody Harbour as well, who received the Paul Harris Fellow Community Award. And Paul Harris is one of the founders of the Rotary Club. So I will just speak very briefly about the Rotary Club. This little article here is about Rotary, Lyons, and Freemasonry. And this is from the District Grand Lodge of Lebanon. So, thanks to the fraternal principles espoused by Freemasonry, other organizations found their birth: the Lions Club, Rotary Club, Elks Club, Loyal Order of Moose, the Odd Fellows, the Eagles, Knights of Pythias, the Optimist Club, the Grange, and the list goes on and on. So all of those kinds of clubs, you'll actually, or fraternities or social organizations, or however they want to market themselves, they are all pretty much, whenever you travel through different towns and such like that, and it says welcome to the town of whatever, welcome to the municipality of whatever, you will always see symbols for, a Masonic Lodge, or the Knights of Pythias, Optimist Club, Lyons, Rotary, etc. So nearly all of these have at least their inspiration, if not a basis, in Freemasonry, but none of them are Masonic. I don't really know about none of them being Masonic, but they definitely have influence in Freemasonry, sure enough. And interestingly enough, Freemasons were founding members of both the Lyons and the Rotary Club, go figure. So Gustav E. Lohr, a Mason, was a charter member of the Rotary Club, though it was founded by Paul Harris, who was not a Mason, and Melvin Jones, the founder of the Lyons Club, was a Freemason. But again, Lyons and Rotary, it says, are not Masonic, even though large number of Freemasons are their members. Really, I'd just say Rotary is cut from the same cloth, if you will. Also, some lodges were largely, if not entirely, composed of Rotarians. The discovery of a badge with the rotary wheel encircling the Masonic pair of compasses and the letter G is evidence of this. Yeah, I would say that that is accurate. So now to move on to talk about Allan Sutherland a little bit. So it mentions this particular healing lodge, if you will. So Allan Sutherland, Anishinaabe historian, knowledge keeper, and healer, known by his spirit name White Spotted Horse of the Lynx clan. He's Anishinaabe and a member of the Skonan First Nation, Treaty 2 territory. He's an elder, traditional knowledge keeper, healer, and historian whose work in the public has made a generational difference in Canada. His strong roots run present, leaving him in the unique position of being a connection between both traditional and contemporary world. Allan had the opportunity of working within First Nations, federal and provincial governments, including grassroots community work for over 30 years. And being that you have an extensive resume, this probably won't be the final time I mention you in a video, Allan. He provides facilitation and training where he is often a sought-after resources person on the history and culture of the Anishinaabe of Turtle Island. He's well known for his creation of the Canadian Indigenous Timeline posters and the Red River de Métis posters. Allan is living out his life purpose as Anishinaabe historian, traditional knowledge keeper, and as a healer with his growing healing bundles. Knowledge keeper east, he is currently the knowledge keeper east of 2 child and family service agencies with Treaty 2 territory, and he's a lodge keeper of his healing lodge and lives in Treaty 1 territory, Cooks Creek, Manitoba, and it is located on the property of Edgar Allan Sutherland at Cooks Creek, Manitoba. The healing lodge is adjacent closely to the main residence. For access to the washroom kitchen, grounds are 9.5 acres that are wooded with a beautiful creek with walking trails, and the healing lodge is unique in that provides traditional ways and modern healing ways. The practices, culture, and values of the Anishinaabe is provided here. There are many traditional ceremonies at the healing lodge that include space for professional development and training. So, and then it says that he is a member of the Speaker Bureau for Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. I'll be definitely diving into that in future videos for sure. So this is interesting that the RRC Polytech pretty much welcomes Allan Sutherland in and of itself, basically another organization here that supports the convergence agenda, which I'll be looking in the organization in future videos. Nice mask, by the way, Allan. So, Red River College Polytechnic is proud to welcome its first Knowledge Keepers Council. Allan Sutherland, Barbara Bruce, Alan McLeod, and Martha Pete will join elders in residence, Paul Gimmond and Una Swan, to provide guidance and diverse Indigenous perspectives through RRC Polytech's work to embed truth and reconciliation. They released their 22 to 26 strategic plan in front of what's ahead. The second of the plan's 3 commitments is to commit to truth and reconciliation by pursuing equity, diversity, and inclusion in everything the college does. Our needs for consultation and engagement are expanding as we work towards advancing truth and reconciliation and embedding Indigenous perspectives across RRC Polytech. This is a vital piece of ensuring we are on the right track, that we are being intentional, says Fred Meyer, President and CEO, RRC Polytech. We are so fortunate to have such esteemed and respected elders and knowledge keepers joining together to support strategic planning and execution across our organization, which will impact all areas from academic programs and culturally appropriate supports to applied research, fostering relationships with Indigenous communities and businesses, and being a prominent workplace in Manitoba. I look forward to seeing this group strengthen the efforts outlined in our new strategic plan. New council will advise senior leadership on strategic initiatives as the college responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 94 calls to action. One of those calls to action is implementing UNDRIP, by the way. The formation of the council also aligns with the Commission's principle number 7 to support reconciliation between Indigenous and the non-Indigenous peoples, which states the perspectives and understanding of Indigenous elders and traditional knowledge keepers of ethics, concepts, and practices of reconciliation are vital to long-term reconciliation. So on and so forth, talking about diversity, inclusion, and whatever other things that colleges want to go on and on about here, so I'm not going to waste my breath, but people involved are mentioned here, and people can feel free to look at the links in the description, as I have said. So, to move forward, I am going to start talking about Gil. Actually, before I even talk about Gil Lapointe over here, I just want to bring your attention to a few images over here. So this right here is just a picture of a live that Josephine and I did. We spoke with someone named David Gray Eagle, who looks like this, and you can see some interesting pictures. Nice flag in the background, by the way. And there were numerous contradictions in this. By the way, in a prior video I have mentioned David Gray Eagle, so I'll be linking that one in the description as well. So there are numerous contradictions in that interview. It will be in the description for people to see if they want to watch the live stream in and of itself. But I could go on and on about the numerous contradictions, but just to give you a couple examples, he mentions he was an urbanized Indian but grew up in Scarborough where there were mostly trees, so that doesn't make sense. He also claims to be native, which couldn't be further from the truth. He also mentions he didn't know what he was getting into with the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, and this is why we called him, especially in relation to Jody Harbour, because he said that he didn't know what he was getting into with the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, but Jody Harbour had mentioned infiltrating the Alliance of Indigenous Nations with him. If you guys want that confirmation or have any questions, you guys can reach out to Josephine LaValle herself if you'd like. And if you're actually infiltrating a group and going undercover, so to speak, then why would David say he has no idea what he's getting into? It doesn't make any sense. He also signed an Alliance of Indigenous Nations document as shown in a prior video. In this prior video, I didn't know who David Gray Eagle was. He was just another name on a paper to me, but basically he's part of the Alliance of Indigenous Nations, which is like an umbrella organization of fake native groups that hold, the ASMIN, which I have spoken about, and various others, such as, I believe, Kinniqui as well. So, and then it says here that basically, he contradicts himself numerous times, and you can go on the We the People Press Canada YouTube channel to watch this full video if you so decide. And you can see that he as well makes some statements that are contrary to his statements made in that particular video over there. And then also, I just want to say that one of the sponsors of Grandmother's Voice is Amazon Web Services, just as an example. But they also support UNDRIP, right, which is number 14 in the 94 calls to action. And like I've mentioned about UNDRIP, it does not define what indigenous actually means in the context of UNDRIP. And it allows all these land and resource rights to quote-unquote indigenous peoples. What does that even mean when the United Nations of all organizations is vaguely using a word like indigenous? So the thing is while these fake native groups like Yasmin and stuff support UNDRIP, same with the band councils, same with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, same with Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, and so on and so forth. So, now to move on to talk about Gil Lapointe, who Grandmother's Voice supports. I'm just going to drink some water first. So here's Gil Lapointe. Welcome to the world of sustainable agriculture and soil regeneration, led by this guy with a PhD. They provide innovative knowledge and actionable plans to restore Mother Earth to her thriving state. Join us on a journey toward healthier soils, better water management, thriving ecosystems, whatever you say. So, and basically, these are some of the areas of focus, and I will say that on Grandmother's Voice, his resume and what he's actually involved with is totally watered down from who he actually is, so we'll be getting into that. We need to observe how nature operates and relearn from their processes. Biomimicry, through a new term, though a new term is essential to our approach. By recreating natural systems, we can avoid many problems and develop management techniques that are in harmony with nature. Right, so trying to mimic nature, I don't see how that is harmonizing with nature in any form. And also, what are you talking about? Are you talking about growing something from a cell, or are you talking about 3D bioprinting? Well, interestingly enough, I'll read his about on another page that actually gives more clarification as to who he is. But there is a biomimicry technical committee that is part of the ISO in and of itself. So the standardization organizations practice this thing called biomimicry, as in mimicking or copying or attempting to copy nature. So Gil Lapointe is part of this organization, or sorry, he and his wife, I believe, run this organization called Oasis Ontario, and of course they endorse the whole climate change type of narrative as well. So it says here he obtained his doctorate from the University of Guelph following his training in plant physiology and biochemistry at the MSc level at Agriculture Canada and University Laval. He then trained in forest biotechnology at the postdoctoral level at the Laurentian Forestry Centre and at the INRA, Versailles, France. Dr. Lapointe added another university-level certificate in bioinformatics from the joint effort of the University of British Columbia, University of Toronto, University of Nova Scotia, and the Genetic Disease Network in Canada. His continued education led him to also obtain a certificate in technology commercialization and trainings with the FDA and on IP for business while he lived in New York States. So, a little fun fact about the FDA, but there's something called the National Nanotechnology Initiative, which is a part of the FDA. I'm quite sure that Gil is more than well aware of this. He worked as a project manager in molecular farming, biotech, and in drug target discovery. He drove key reorganization and growth initiatives for biotech companies. He liaised with corporate investors and managed scientific research as well. He also owned a cross-border biotech company for genetic testing, Upon his move back to Canada, he became a genetic consultant to a health and wellness company and managed to participate into a clinical trial providing the benefits of his genetic test. He also started a high-end residential landscaping company based in Mississauga, which he led for 15 years. He then became a horticultural consultant prior to becoming a production advisor and scientist in a nursery setting. He led research on sustainability, soil health, cover crops, and plant health within the nursery on 15 farms and liaised between all departments of production. His work led him to become a consultant for other nurseries and farmers. And then, of course, you have this particular woman here who works with Gila. So, and people, like I said, can just look in the description if they want to read about her themselves, they can. My focus right now is on Gil. So, to go over his LinkedIn page just so that people can see in more depth exactly. He's the director of genetics at something called Nutopia Inc., which we'll be looking at. And his work experience organized creating business in licensing of new technology and new technologies in a research center in horticulture. Entrepreneurship, he developed a landscaping company, drove key reorganization and growth initiatives of a startup biotechnology company, started a cross-border medical/biotech companies in obesity, predisposition, drug discovery, and also in the pharmaceutical sector, molecular mining, search for genetic targets for drug development in obesity, and support for fundraising activities, driving the development and expansion of a startup company, technology analysis, product development, market analysis, and business development, developing and negotiating contracts with companies for sales, marketing, and clinical validation, and presenting scientific results to management and investors, training scientific personnel, and liaising between scientific business and IT personnel. So, he's the director of genetics in Nutopia Inc. He's not the CEO, but he is the CEO of something called GeneOb, was for at least 4 years, and they developed and organized a medical device and technology company that has commercialized a DNA-based test for weight management and is also active in partnerships for obesity drug discovery, and the work required to be skilled in every aspect of a company organization such as patent writing, IP negotiation, business and marketing plans, writing and application, partnership negotiations, financial projections, valuation analysis, fundraising, sales and marketing, etc. And then he's the director of business management in Vineland Research and Innovation Center that's in the Niagara area. Developed a business plan in order to create a successful business in licensing of new technologies for a horticulture research center involved in wine, ornamentals, pesticides, and fruit tree research. I developed relationships with botanical gardens, private companies, universities, and growers in order to initiate the licensing of new technologies. His work involved deep relationships with the Niagara region and secondly, Ontario and the rest of Canada. And he was the scientific advisor of CVAR Obesity Inc., working on in the Biomedical Research Center, Institutes for Pharmaceutical Discovery, and Merck Lifa, Merck being a pharma company. So, and then he's worked at Medicago, which basically talks about molecular genetic tools for molecular farming in alfalfa for producing pharmaceutical molecules in alfalfa plants, and implemented bioinformatics tools and managed several research projects, worked within the context of a startup company. So, Medicago also made their own version of a supposed plant-based inoculation for that sickness that was never isolated, where people were locked down, for that sickness where the genomic sequence was never isolated, and that's what resulted in a lockdown of sorts in 2020. So I think people can figure out what I'm referring to. I just can't use certain words, especially the one that starts with the letter C, in order to keep this on YouTube. So apologies for the vague language. So, of course, his education is at the University of Guelph within the New York district at the working at the FDA there. Delwood in Buffalo, New York. Sorry for the pronunciation. Erie Institute of Law and the Bar Association of Erie County, New York. Group of technology transfer organizations in Quebec. University of BC, University of Toronto, Ontario, University of Nova Scotia, and Agriculture Canada at the University of Laval, which is in Quebec, Canada, and Bioagronomy, University of Laval. So this guy has worked with gardening and plants and stuff like that, as well as biotechnologies, DNA manipulation pretty much, and also as well has a background in pharma and also basically big tech in and of itself. So this guy is fully invested in the biodigital convergence. I'm going to look at Newtopia, which he works for, and then we're going to look at probably the CEO. Newtopia works closely with organizations and their employees to deliver high personalized and targeted disease prevention solutions that are proven to reduce employer healthcare costs. This is based out in New York. And Newtopia gains a deep understanding of each employee through a unique combination of genetic testing, personality matched coaching, and smart technology. There you go. And then inspires at-risk employees to achieve and sustain healthy lifestyles. Employers partnering with Newtopia save on healthcare costs and realize the additional benefits of having a more productive and healthy workforce. Right. So, and then these are some of the employees here at Newtopia Inc. So now that I've given a little description of Newtopia, I'm just going to show you Jeff Ruby, the CEO, and then we're going to talk a little bit about biomimicry, and then after we do that, we're going to move into talking about Redrum Motorcycle Club. So Jeff Ruby is the founder and CEO, health innovator and serial entrepreneur who is passionate about shifting the focus of healthcare from sick people to keeping people healthy, holds a joint Juris Doctor and Master of Business Administration from York University's Osgoode Hall Law School and Schulich School of Business in Toronto. Sorry for the pronunciation. Jeff received his bachelor's degree from Western University in London, Ontario. So that's the CEO of the company, and the head of genetics for Newtopia is Gil Lapointe. So LaPointe, whatever. So, and like I said, anybody is welcome to converse with me directly and even do a live stream. I would suggest to Gil to actually do that in public so that he could talk about his involvement in the biodigital convergence. And also, same with anybody who I'm mentioning really in this video or any other one. So, it says here that this is about biomimicry. Regenerative development calls for built environment design, construction and operation approaches that do not degrade social and ecological systems but actively regenerate them with net positive performance outcomes. Within infrastructure, existing industry approaches focus on improving sustainability and resilience through progressive reductions in negative impact. To shift beyond damage reduction through regenerative performance, it will be necessary to harness new and innovative technologies, design, and engineering approaches as they emerge. The field of biomimicry looks to biology and ecology to identify natural models that can inspire design and engineering solutions. Despite increasing biomimicry research, inquiry into infrastructure opportunities for biomimicry has been limited, and for the potential of biomimicry to support regenerative performance in infrastructure has not been explored. This paper uses a systematic literature review to identify applications of biomimicry in built environment. With a focus on the potential for infrastructure applications, this paper identifies the need for further investigation into system-level biomimicry opportunities for clearer articulation of sustainability and resilience benefits, and for greater alignment with broader industry and global trends. This paper is relevant for practitioners, academics, and government agencies looking to leverage emerging technologies and innovation to achieve project and organizational sustainability, resilience, and regenerative performing objectives. And then it says that in biomimicry, it has been proposed that there are many regenerative models that have already emerged within living systems over 3.8 billion years of evolution on Earth, and that these models can be investigated and assessed for their applicability to design and engineering. Within the field of biomimicry, it is important to address distinctions in terms which then provide clarity for the structure and scope of the systematic literature review, as outlined in biomimetics terminology, concepts, and methodology. Biomimicry refers to the philosophy and interdisciplinary design approaches, taking nature as a model to meet the challenges of sustainable development, social, environment, and economic. So then you have the ISO Technical Committee 266, which is led by the Chinese Standardization Organization. You pretty much have the classification, definition, and development of terminology in the field of biomimetics, description of the potentials and limitations of biomimetics as an innovation system or sustainability strategy, and description and standardization of methods in biomimetics, biomimetic materials, processes, and products throughout their life cycle. So this pretty much shows that the standardization organizations support exactly what Gila is doing, and he might have even worked directly with them. So, but once again, that is for a live stream if he wishes to speak with me in regards to this. So, this is Celebration of Nations. I mentioned this in a prior video, speaking about Michelle Elise, who's the artistic director, and as well Tony Belcourt, who is Métis and has basically given speeches at the International Telecommunication Union, the World Bank, and other things of this sort, etc., and endorses UNDRIP. So it says that Celebration of Nations has emerged as one of Canada's preeminent Indigenous cultural gatherings, with a highly credentialed Celebration of Nations curatorial team led by artistic director Michelle Elise Burnett. Each year presents a new and exciting exploration into a theme that possesses crossover appeal, designed to resonate not only with Indigenous peoples but also with the broader Canadian public. So what's interesting, okay, so it's presented by this consulting company, which is also, ran by Michelle Elise. And then you have the First Ontario Performing Centre. Its lead sponsor is Brock University and the specific department of it. Government partners include the federal government, the Ontario government, and then the government of Niagara region and St. Catharines. And its community sponsors include Niagara College, Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, Gales Fueling, which is in all over Niagara, and then the First Nations Technical Institute, which we will be looking at Suzanne Brandt, who works for the First Nations Technical Institute, once again looking at her article, Indigenous Perspectives on Biodigital Convergence. And then, of course, community partners, you have Grandmother's Voice, so that's exactly why I brought this into the video, to show that correlation. And then you have Plenty Canada, which I've spoke about in the video where I talked about the Friendship Centers, which the Niagara Regional Friendship Center and Fort Erie Friendship Center pretty much fall under the umbrella of the National Association of Friendship Centers, which is led by Josephine of the World Economic Forum. So that's where all friendship centers fall under the umbrella of. And Carl Dockstader, who used to be a director of the Fort Erie Friendship Center, works for Plenty Canada here as well, and has his own show called One Dish, One Mic, which Michelle Elise herself has appeared on. So that's just some correlation here to Landscape of Nations and what exactly and who exactly they partner with, excuse me. So with the First Nations Technical Institute. Now this is, of course, pretty interesting because Suzanne Brandt of the First Nations Technical Institute has also worked quite closely with Policy Horizons, which is a policy arm in the Canadian government. It was created by the Canadian Privy Council, and essentially Policy Horizons is the face in Canada of the Biodigital Convergence and is pretty much one of these organizations attempting to push that forward in its many facets and forms. So, all in all, I have used this article many times throughout different videos, but I think that it is important and also explains the idea of synthetic biology quite well. And fact of the matter, too, is that Suzanne Brandt is also a member of the Rotary Club, just like Crystal Vanderelst, the leader of Policy Horizons, and also just like Jody Harbour and Renee Thomas Hill were brought to Rotary events there. So I think that's an interesting parallel right there. So I'm going to first talk about the Haudenosaunee people here. For people that may not have watched my videos or seen this, the Haudenosaunee, formerly called the Iroquois or people of the Longhouse, are the Confederacy of 6 First Nations: Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Onondaga, Seneca, and Tuscarora. And those groups, or those peoples, commonly live in upstate New York, Quebec, Ontario, Wisconsin, and Oklahoma, or rather that's where their traditional territories are. And then just want to start the aspect here talking about the convergence here, and they use the great law of peace in order to convey it. So Mama Day's words evoke the Haudenosaunee principle of good mind derived from the great law of peace. Good mind occurs when the people put their minds and emotions in harmony with the flow of the universe. The good mind confers the ability to make a sound judgment for the welfare of the broader Haudenosaunee society. And when you connect good mind to land, to the Haudenosaunee, the good mind and land are inseparable, for neither is possible without the other. And Sheridan and Longbow assert that where one is has everything to do with who one is. What we take from all this is that the full expression of our humanity is only possible through intimate connection to each other, to territory, and the various natural cycles shaping existence. Policy Horizons, exploring biodigital convergence paper, identifies an important policy question: could traditional resource-based competitiveness advantages fade? And suggests that decentralized food production through synthetic biology could lead to the ability to create food and engineer meat without the need for arable land. So decentralized, this all has to do with the blockchain, which is basically a ledger system to keep track of inventory. And then synthetic biology, what they're doing is they're talking about 3D bio-printed food is what they're pretty much talking about. That's what synthetic biology is 3D bioprinting. And then when you talk about the land here, they're basically saying that the good mind, somebody who has, the good mind, if you will, is somebody that also seeks to preserve the land. And the definition of preserving the land through this article is basically 3D bioprinting everything. So I don't really want to eat a 3D printed steak personally, but this is pretty much what Suzanne Brandt is pushing for. So, and Suzanne Brandt and the First Nations Technical Institute is based out in Tyendinaga, which is Mohawk territory. And also this is where, if people want to look at, there was a live stream I did with Josephine where, we had a few different live streams that day, and we confronted some people in Confederation Park, some people involved with the freedom movement, and one of them, his name is Blaine, and his neighbor is actually Suzanne Brandt. So there you have it. And now the Redrum Motorcycle Club right here says it's an indigenous-based motorcycle club founded in 2006 on the foundation of the Red Road with a focus on brotherhood, motorcycling, community, respect, responsibility. Yeah, to say so. And they also claim not to be a 1% motorcycle club. So like, Hells Angels and Outlaws and Banditos are examples of 1% outlaw groups. And then you have 99%er motorcycle clubs, which are, so you have 1%er motorcycle clubs, and then you have 99%er motorcycle clubs, which basically are police, military, paramedics, firefighters, or former employees in those departments. But really, 99%er and 1%er motorcycle clubs is like no different of a label than liberal and conservative. You know, it's really a title that means absolutely nothing besides surface value talking points, really, and facades of conduct. So, and then you also have the Red Spirit Women's Motorcycle Riding Club, which consists of women riders from all over the world. And so then you have here what is called the Red Hawk Council. So the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council, or Indigenous Arts Council, whatever Cliff Mathias calls it. Cliff Mathias is the face of Red Hawk. He runs it, and he is also the person that is the face of the Red Rum Motorcycle Club. So it says here that the Red Hawk Native American Arts Council is a not-for-profit organization founded and maintained by Native American artists and educators serving the tri-state area, and since 1994, the council is dedicated to educating the general public about Native American heritage through song, dance, theater, works of art, and other cultural forms of expression. The council represents artists from North, South, Central American, Caribbean, and Polynesian indigenous cultures. So, and then it says it produces 4 of the largest Native American heritage celebrations in the Northeast. The Arts Council also hosts festivals, workshops, theater presentations, educational programs addressing stereotypes and fostering an awareness on Native cultures from a historical standpoint with a focus on contemporary cultural practices. So I'm just going to show some videos here. So here's a lovely photo of Cliff Mathias wearing a mask. And of course, Red Hawk was administering this particular experiment, if you will. That experiment falls under the bracket of synthetic biology, just to connect that with the convergence. And then here's a picture of him with one of the original members of the American Indian movement named Tom Goldtooth. I spoke about him in my previous video, and basically the American Indian movement, pretty much when they attended Standing Rock, they helped form what is called the International Indian Treaty Council, which is an NGO with consultative status at the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and also the Indigenous Environmental Network, which is ran by Tom Goldtooth, is a partner and affiliate of the International Indian Treaty Council. And I also want to say here that, so here's Cliff Mathias once again, you know, the director, cultural director of Red Hawk and international president of Red Rum. He and some other members of the Red Rum Motorcycle Club attended the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples, and basically it is the Red Rum is the first motorcycle club to ever sit on the floor of the United Nations. And also, just want to throw this out as a fun fact here, is that the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples is an advisory body to the Economic and Social Council. So that's interesting that that body works hand in hand with the Economic and Social Council, and that's exactly where the International Indian Treaty Council has consultative status through. So, and then of course Jason Momoa, the actor who played Aquaman, is a part of the Red Rum Motorcycle Club. So, to now move forward here, I just want to show some of the different organizations here. We see the Rockefeller Foundation on these events here, and then we also see, of course, out of these various organizations here, we're going to look at the Laurie M. Tish or whatever, the Illumination Fund, and we'll probably explore some of these other ones like the Nike Community Impact Fund and stuff like that in future videos. But we're going to focus on the Rockefeller Brothers Fund right now, and we're also going to focus on the Illumination Fund, like I mentioned. So, pretty interesting. Red Hawk is, I believe, out in Brooklyn, New York, or New York City, not sure, and as well, that's where the United Nations main headquarters is. So, to give you an example about the Illumination Fund, just to kind of read about it. So all those organizations I showed were funders of Red Hawk, which is ran by Cliff Mathias, like I said, who also runs Redrum. So it was founded in 2007 by this philanthropist, Lori M. Tish, and the Illumination Fund plays an active role in supporting innovative approaches across a range of issues, ensuring that arts and arts education are accessible to all, promoting health and creating opportunities for civic engagement. The Illumination Fund focuses its support on New York City. So what's interesting is out of its various grants and such like that, besides, with Red Hawk, of course, one of the organizations that it supports is what's called the Center for an Urban Future, and it says it's a catalyst for smart and sustainable policies that reduce inequality, increase economic mobility, and grow the economy in New York City. An independent, nonpartisan policy organization that uses fact-based research to elevate important and often overlooked issues into the radar of policymakers and advance practical solutions that strengthen New York and help all New Yorkers participate in the city's rising prosperity. And so you can see that the leader of it, his name is Jonathan Bowles. We'll probably be looking at him more in future videos as well. He's the executive director for An Urban Future, a think tank that serves as a catalyst for smart and sustainable policies to reduce inequality, increase economic mobility, and grow the economy in New York City. For nearly 20 years, Jonathan has been the architect of organizations, policy agenda, and is responsible for making the center one of New York's most innovative and influential organizations with ideas and recommendations that are widely respected and frequently adopted by policymakers, business leaders, and non-profit practitioners. And it says that at the center, Jonathan has authored more than 24 reports, including a widely acclaimed 2007 study about the significant impact immigrant entrepreneurs are having on cities' economies, an influential study about New York City's innovation economy, and a report about how to retain and grow New York's middle class. He's been a guest contributor for the New York Times Daily News and the Council on Foreign Relations, which is pretty much just another synonym like the United Nations, same idea, on a range of urban issues, including the need to diversify New York City's economy and the importance of immigrant entrepreneurs. His research about key economic trends facing New York and its 5 boroughs, the value of small businesses to cities, and the economic impact of industries ranging from air cargo to biotechnology has been covered in publications ranging from the New York Times and USA Today to The Economist. Jonathan is a frequent moderator and speaker at conferences and panel discussions on urban policy in New York and nationally. So, I'm going to just take a little drink of water here, and then I will finish the video. Rather, I got just a tiny bit more to get through, just bear with me. So, going to be talking about the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It says, to midwife the technoetic trans-evolution of the universal Christ mind, idolized by Fuller and Teilhard de Chardin, Hubbard, which is Barbara Hubbard, who's now passed away, set up the Foundation for Conscious Evolution, which is seed-funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, the brother of John D. Rockefeller III, David Rockefeller, Nelson, and Winthrop Rockefeller. Lawrence was a president and a founding trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is one of the direct funders of Red Hawk, which is a corporate philanthropy that finances social impact investments in biotechnology and digital technology. These, of course, are key building blocks in the Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies matrix at the crux of Hubbard's transhumanist dreams of collective conscious evolution. Lawrence also bankrolled esoteric studies into Gnostic Christ consciousness and noetical parapsychology. So, I've used this article in multiple videos as well. So, Teilhard de Chardin is a Jesuit, and pretty much him and others formed the idea of something called the noosphere, which is like if you take the globe model and all the various layers of it, atmosphere, ionosphere, whatever, the most outer layer is called the noosphere. And when you reach the Christ consciousness, you also reach the noosphere, which is a kind of sort of form of enlightenment. And the manner in which this is done is through nanotechnology, biotechnology, and basically anything that relates to the biodigital convergence. So essentially, transhumanism is the way to reach the noosphere, according to this Jesuit. All these organizations, like whether we're talking about Jesuits or whether we're talking about the UN or standardization organizations or whatever, they might use different language, but all have the same goals. And so, with this being said here as well, it's got to make you wonder here, why is Cliff Matthias of Red Hawk Council, why is that able to be funded by things like a Rockefeller Brothers Fund, or even the Illumination Fund, which basically also gives grants to people developing smart infrastructure and stuff like that. So I would love to hear from Cliff Matthias directly to see exactly what he would have to say in terms of how he achieved a partnership with organizations like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Illumination Fund and such like that. And I'll be even diving into some of the other organizations a little bit further, because it's definitely interesting to see that somebody who's part of a motorcycle club that also has a native community center of sorts is partnered with organizations that full out support the biodigital convergence. So it would be interesting to hear from him directly, of course, on this. And of course it would be interesting to hear directly from Grandmother's Voice as well, and or also the founders of Idle No More, or any of the people backing it from the Polaris Institute. That would be interesting as well. So, what's interesting too about this Rockefeller Brothers Fund is that you see it also funding the Palestinian movement as well. So, I'll be leaving those links in the description as well. And people can feel free to reach out to me on Facebook at Matt Unseated, or on YouTube at Matt the Unseated. And as well, I'm going to advocate for people to actually protect the water and check something called findaspring.org, which maps out different natural springs all across the world. But all in all, I'd say that's key and important to protect the water, truly protect the water, not being a part of organizations that are no different than the regimes who oppress us. The fake artificial rebellions of sorts are either cut from the same cloth, working on the same agenda, or have the exact same funders as these so-called regimes do. So, thanks everybody for watching, and take care of yourselves, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and take care of yourself, everyone. Thanks.